When Judgment Day comes to the island of Krakoa, it will mean that Exodus will have to take up his sword once again. What'll happen next? Well, let's hop into the pages of Immortal X-Men, issue number 5, and find out together, shall we? So then, as with all the other issues of Immortal X-Men, they pick one member of the council and focus on them to tell a story. This time around, it's Exodus. We actually see a point in Bennet du Paris' life much earlier than has ever been recorded in the comics, back when he was a Templar knight during the Crusades. Yes, that's right, he really has been a religious fundamentalist that long. It seemed that after he got his ass kicked out of Jerusalem, he wandered the desert for a little bit until he had an epiphany. One that he described as his own personal burning bush moment, the moment wherein he first made contact with the Phoenix Force. Now, du Paris was still pretty much human at this point, and he wouldn't really know what this moment meant until many lifetimes later, but it's implied that this was the beginning of his fanatic search to find a messiah to believe in. Now, this issue also just so happens to be a tie into the events of Judgment Day, which is fitting because Gillen is writing this book and writing that event. We join Exodus and the rest of the Quiet Council as they go over their game plan for the impending Eternal attack. Xavier and a bunch of the other council members admit that they're a little surprised that they're fighting with the Eternals. They assumed that they'd be making war on the Avengers or Orchis beforehand, but hey, you never can tell. People like Emma Frost say that something like this was inevitable, that at the Hellfire Gala she read many minds, and the prevailing idea amongst all of these different factions is that mutant kind has grown weak and listless ever since Krakoa lost the likes of Magneto and Apocalypse, the sort of mad dog killer types who wouldn't be afraid to strike hard and strike first. All this talk of Apocalypse actually reminds Exodus of the first time he met En Sabinur all those hundreds of years ago back in the desert. Apocalypse saved his life and gave him a new purpose as an acolyte. For the first time in his life, Exodus felt like he had a real purpose again, a raison d'etre. The only problem is that Apocalypse ended up being something of a false god. He attempted to test du Paris' loyalty by having him kill his best friend Garrington, aka the Black Knight of that era. Fun fact, Garrington is also tied to Cersei, one of the Eternals, meaning that Exodus actually has some rather interesting insight into how they work as a people. Exodus would ultimately refuse to play Isaac in this play and attack Apocalypse, in doing so getting put to sleep for another couple thousand years. Still though, what he has to offer about Eternals is actually pretty useful to the rest of the council. They are essentially immortal, reborn forever out of the Great Machine, and their cities exist in other dimensions, meaning it's not like the X-Men can just show up there and kick their asses whenever they want. Now, even though this is an important do-or-die meeting, Exodus' mind can't help but wander. He remembers back to the first time he met Magneto, yet another man who he thought could be his messiah, someone to believe in, someone to give his life purpose and meaning. Unfortunately though, once their work was done, Exodus discovered that Eric was just another prophet, not the person that he was been looking for his entire life. Still though, his time spent with him was eye-opening. He had what he believed to be his own revelation about the mutant kind, and especially about the X gene. You see, an X is really just a cross on its side, isn't it? Meaning that as far as Exodus saw it, mutants, the children of the atom, were the true promised people of God, and he wanted nothing more than to be the rock on which a brand new church was built in their honor. But before he can do any of that though, he's going to have to deal with the Eternals. This story ends up hooking up with the first Judgment Day issue, wherein the Quiet Council comes under attack by the Eternals' Unimind. In that story, we saw that the heroes were able to push back the forces of Droog and the Unimind, but because of this story, we actually get to see how it went down. You see, Xavier protected everyone else, while Emma, Hope, and Exodus formed a sort of psychic strike force. And because du Paris is a big fan of visualization, when he goes after the Unimind, he just doesn't see it as it is. Instead, he imagines himself once again as a glorious crusader, lopping off the heads of a deadly dragon. In his left hand, he has a spiky crystal shield representing Emma Frost, who hurts but also protects, and in his strong right hand, a flaming sword to represent Hope. Honestly, that's pretty good symbology if you ask me, and it's not the last time the book does something like that either. The X-Men may have won the day and pushed back the Eternals, but they know this fight is long from over. They're only just regrouping, and as such, the X-Men will have to regroup too if they hope to repel yet another attack. And with that, we have Exodus's third and final flashback. You'll know that there was a long period of time where this character just didn't show up in X-Men stories. Well, they explain it away here that he was out in space testing the limits of his own body and his own faith. Basically, he kept throwing himself into the sun over and over again, again, but despite his best efforts, he just wouldn't die. This kept going on until one day he heard of the coming of hope. The first mutant child to be born ever since the Scarlet Witch whispered the words that changed mutant kind forever. Exodus saw this as a true holy sign that perhaps it was Hope of all people who really was the Messiah that he was looking for, the one who would change his life and the one he would be willing to swear an oath of fealty to, which is why he's been so close to her since this series began. Also, while everyone else is pretty horrified about what a war with the Eternals could mean, Exodus isn't scared at all. In fact, he thinks this is more or less his life coming full circle. He's a crusader again, fighting a holy war. The only difference is this time he plans to win, because he is not only the rock on which a new mutant church will be built, but he is also the rock in the hand of Cain. For all you non-Sunday school kids out there, Cain killed his brother Abel with a rock. See, and just like that, those 13 years of Catholic school were only kind of a waste. And so that was Immortal X-Men issue number 5, everybody, and overall I thought it was a fairly interesting little story that Gillen was telling here. It's funny to think of all the mutant members of the Quiet Council who would end up getting the big tie-in issue to Gillen's big event. It would be Exodus, but I guess it kinda makes sense. I know when Hickman first debuted Exodus again as a member of the new Quiet Council, I had to laugh to myself. Oh geez, we're going back to blood ties, I thought. Oh wow, what a 90s deep cut. This is the comic equivalent of only 90s kids will understand the character. Which might explain why no one was tripping over themselves to tell an Exodus-centric story until right this moment, but Gillen I think actually does a pretty good job that again, it's a story about a fundamentalist. A guy who has spent literally thousands of years with amazing power waiting for someone else to tell him what to do and what it all means. They also seem to be planting the seeds too that Exodus may end up becoming the new owner of the Phoenix Force soon, which considering how big and long and involved Judgment Day is going to be, this is certainly the time when they could tell that story, and maybe they will, who's to say. Overall, I thought this one was pretty good. Maybe not as deep or nuanced as the Emma Frost story from the previous issue, but I liked this one enough. Overall, I'd feel comfortable giving it a 7.5 out of 10.
Hey there everyone, Kate Joel again, and I just want to thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. It means a lot to me. And hey, if you enjoyed the book I covered in this issue and want some comics of your own, might I recommend Book Depository? It's my #1 place for shopping for comic book trades. You get a great price, and if you use my link down in the description, you'll actually be helping me out at the same time. You get something, I get something, everybody wins, right? So until next time everyone, I've been Joel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.